Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. I am really excited to talk about the new application round. I know we have, the applications are in full swing in the sense of putting together your pre-essay materials. And one of those components is associated with your letters of recommendation. So that is something that we're going to talk about today. And I encourage you to, check out all of our events that we have for the month of May on our SIA admission website. Next week, we're going to talk about the MBA application timeline. So what you should be working on, when you should be working on it, so that you have a better sense of what the next couple of months will look like, and especially if you're targeting round one. Obviously, you have more time if you're targeting round two, but you still want to know when you should be doing things. So I encourage you to reach out to register for that event so that you can be notified when we go live. The event registration is going to be posted on the comment section, so you can go there directly, or if you go to our website, caadmissions.com/event calendar, you can look at and register for all the events that we have for the month of May. If you want to talk about your specific application, your specific letters of recommendation, and need support in this process, I encourage you to reach out for a complimentary consultation. We would be speaking together to discuss your background, your goals, and what are some of the areas that you're struggling with, and seeing if we are a good fit as far as the services that we offer, and making sure that those are in alignment. So there is a link on the screen, as well as it will be in the comments section as well. Every week we host a live event focused on different content. So if you're not registering for our event specifically, I do encourage you to subscribe to our channel that is on YouTube. Share it with friends who are also going through this process. And also follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook, because we do post our events there as well. And our lives are across channels, although the videos are housed on our YouTube page. So with that, why don't we get started? I will be discussing. I will go through the slides that I have prepared in advance of this session. And we have had some registrants register in advance who have asked some questions. So we have some questions that have come in, but I do encourage you to reach out or to write your comment in the chat box of any of the platforms you're joining us. So if you're joining us from LinkedIn, please register. Please write your questions in the comments. I will not be sharing your name on the screen, so don't worry about your name showing up. Just be candid with the questions that you have, the areas that you are confused about, that you would like a little bit more clarity, and I'll be happy to answer those questions live. So I will move to the presentation with the few slides that I have put together. So for those of you who do not know me, I'm the founder of SIA Admissions, which is a boutique admission coaching firm who helps ambitious applicants put together strong stories and strong presentation of their achievement and their successes to gain admission to a top 20 business school. My focus is helping you tell your story and your strengths. And oftentimes, some of the elements that I see in applicants when they're going through this process is they do have a hard time, showcasing what the strengths are, especially if you have limited space. And also, sometimes applicants have a hard time demonstrating their value and their contributions, which are critical components of the MBA application and success. That is my bread and butter. That is the thing that I focus on in the application and with clients that I work with. And that goes across the entire spectrum of the application, from the discovery all the way to application submission and essays and resumes and letters of recommendation, as well as interview preparation and final decision. So again, if you would like to discuss your particular case, I encourage you to reach out and schedule a consultation to discuss with me, your plans and what next steps looks like for you. But today we're going to focus on the entire or rather the letters of recommendation and who you choose to put together, to request essentially a letter of recommendation. So we're going to cover components around what role does a recommender play, who should you choose to write a letter of recommendation, what are the common letters of recommendation questions, and along the way I'll be talking about what are the do's and don'ts of those pieces. So the recommender's role is very critical when it comes to the MBA application. It's true essentially for any of graduate schools that you are applying to, but given that we are talking about the MBA, that is a very important role that the recommender plays in your admission. When it comes to your application, you are going to put, of course, your best foot forward. You are going to showcase how you shine, showcase what your strengths are, showcase what your values are, showcase how you fit the culture, what kind of contributions you'll be able to make. And that is your perspective. The recommender is the outsider, essentially, an outsider perspective who is there to corroborate your own strengths that you showcase. Now, they don't need to be parallel in the sense of, sharing the same exact stories. Rather, this individual or these individuals that you choose to write letters of recommendation do need to showcase the character that is across the board also in your application itself. So they are someone who are going to be sort of vouching for your character, vouching for your fit. They're going to validate some of the achievements. So you're not the only person talking about your successes. There's other people who have witnessed your success and are able to speak to that. They're also there to compare you to other people. So you can have a lot of success, but perhaps you are an underperformer in relation to your team because your team is just this rock star team, right? Obviously, we don't want that kind of recommendation letter to go to your MBA programs, but that's the comparison of where do you stack up against other peers who are in the same position as you, not across the board in the sense of how do you compare to everyone in your organization, but really someone on your same level. Do you have potential to be a future leader? When it comes to MBA programs, top schools are looking for candidates who have the potential to be, future CEOs, CFOs, COOs, any of the C-suite roles that you can imagine, because those are the people they imagine you would eventually become. And you need a recommender who sees your potential as someone who is able to lead effectively, lead with vision, and lead in a way that showcases that character, even if you are not there personally yet, or professionally rather yet. And given that business schools and the future of work is very collaborative, admission teams are also looking to see how collaborative you are with others, how others see it in relation to the peers that you have been a part of. So if the recommender writes a letter that says, Susan works really well alone, not sure that that's going to be something that will entice the admission team to say yes to you, right? It's not about you working alone. Obviously, everyone needs to be able to work alone. You shouldn't be only able to work with other people, but you do need to have the ability to work in a collaborative setting, because that's what your MBA is going to be like, and then that's what also the future is going to be like as well. So who do you choose to write letters of recommendation? The ideal scenario is that you ask your immediate supervisor, right? This is the ideal scenario. However, it's understandable that you won't always have that option, or not everyone has that option to choose the immediate supervisor. Whether that's because you don't want to tell them that you are applying to business school because you fear that they may not give you the jobs that you want to work on. They may sort of not be supportive. They may jeopardize your MBA application. Whatever your reasons are for not choosing your supervisor, it's understandable, right? But you still need to have someone who is going to be able to speak about you and your potential as a future leader. So the thing that you don't do is ask a colleague, right? That is an element that you should not be, or a recommender that you should not be choosing, because a colleague cannot speak about you, cannot answer the questions that the letters of recommendation asks for them to address. So it cannot be someone who is on your same level or below you. So it can't be someone you supervise. I know one could say, like, how am I as a leader, and how would they be able to speak to that? This is not that kind of letter recommendation. They're really looking for someone that has supervised you. So if you're not able to ask your immediate supervisor, or perhaps one of your recommenders is your immediate supervisor, who is the second one? This could be direct. So it could be a client, especially if you are an entrepreneur, a business partner, right? A second option can be that, or someone who is supervising your work in the volunteer capacity that you are a part of. So that's extracurricular work that you are doing as on the side, particularly if you only have one recommender that you can choose from your current work itself. The recommenders should one of the recommenders must be a professional recommendation letter. So both of your recommendation letters cannot be extracurricular supervisors, because the admission team is going to start wondering, how are your relationships at work, right? A volunteer letter recommendation is not as strong as someone who has immediately supervised you in a professional setting. Now, if you're not able to ask someone who is your immediate supervisor, then you can ask someone who has supervised a part of your work. So perhaps you worked on projects where someone was the lead of that project. That person can write a letter recommendation in relation to how you worked in that particular project. So you want to have a project that is somewhat, where you had time to actually develop and showcase your skills. And it shouldn't be a project that took a day to complete, right? So you need it to be a little bit longer so that the recommender can provide detailed letters of recommendation. So when it comes to letters of recommendation, some of the things that you do need to keep in mind when you're choosing the recommender is that they have to be able to answer these questions. They're essentially the common letter recommendations. There are about 4 questions, but these are the 2 main questions that require a lot more detail. So the first question is, how does the candidate performance compare to that of other well-qualified individuals in a similar role? What are the principal strengths? Every school is going to be slightly different in relation to how this question is framed, and even how much space you have to answer, or they have to answer the letter recommendation or the question. So this is essentially one of the main GMAC common letter of recommendation questions, but you do have to keep in mind which schools you're applying to, what are their questions, because some schools have different questions. So for example, Wharton has different questions from these, so you do want to make sure that you are fully aware of the questions that the schools ask, and making sure that your recommenders are able to answer those questions. And when I say they're able to answer those questions, they must be able to answer with detailed examples. So a letter recommendation where the recommender just speaks in sort of vague statements, where they say that you are a great person, great employee, but don't really elaborate what great means, because great is subjective, and give specific examples, that is a very weak letter recommendation that will not support your MBA applications. So you absolutely want to make sure that your recommenders are able to answer these questions with supporting examples, and make sure that you and be able to vividly demonstrate how you are great, right? Whatever the great means for those individuals. So this is the first question. The second question is, describe the most important piece of constructive feedback you have given the candidate. Please detail the circumstances and the applicant's response. If your recommender has not given you any feedback, that can be very problematic in a letter recommendation, because you have one of the main second questions that is asked is about the feedback that they have given you. And as a supervisor, especially if they've been able to supervise you for some time, they should be able to have given you or speak about some feedback that they have given you that you are able to then respond from that. So just want to take a moment here. Any questions, write them down in the comment form, whether you are in the comment box, whether you're joining us from LinkedIn, whether you're joining us from any one of our platforms. I see that there's a question from Instagram. So I'm just going to answer the question. I'm going to take a break right here for a moment. So should I ask one recommendation from a manager at work and another from a nonprofit that I do extensive work with? That is a perfect person to choose as a recommender, or those are the perfect people to choose as recommenders, given that they're two. So yes, if you've done extensive work with your volunteer nonprofit sort of engagements, absolutely, that person is perfect to write the letter recommendation or the second letter recommendation. And the first one, being your manager, is also perfect. Just make sure that you're guiding them along the way of what you want them to talk about and how you want them to talk about your different experiences, because you do have to remember that leaders have other people that they are supervising in addition to you, and they may forget about some of the amazing things that you have done. So they do need to be reminded, and this is a good time to actually remind them on what your accomplishments have been. There's another Instagram question that has come in, is what kind of feedback should the letter recommendation discuss? Is it positive or negative? Well, the feedback is actually negative, right? So the feedback is something like, here's a circumstance where you did something incorrectly, right? Where you handled the situation incorrectly. You were given feedback by the person who is writing the letter recommendation. And then they're talking about essentially, how did you respond to the feedback? So were you someone who took offense, didn't talk to them for a month? Like, what was your approach to receiving that feedback? But what's important, which by the way, you shouldn't be, that's not the appropriate way to approach that. But what follows then is to essentially share, how did you learn from that experience? I know that's not part of the question that's specifically asked, but at the end of the day, any kind of negative feedback or negative experience, there is a lesson to be learned. And that is something your recommender does need to speak about as well. All right, let's continue. Please write your questions in Instagram, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on YouTube, any one of the platforms you're joining us from, so that I can answer your questions directly. Excellent. So let's continue. So when it comes to the first question, that first question is really asking, what are your strengths? Right? So the schools want to know what makes you stand out. What are your strengths? Because not everyone has the same strengths, right? So part of the question is the comparison to peers, right? So your recommender must be able to compare you to other people, right? They want to highlight then your key strengths. So what are the strengths that you bring to the table? I will say one of the things that you don't want to do is to have your recommender say that you are really organized. That's great. You can be amazing at organizing, but it's not really something that business schools are necessarily looking for. It's kind of an assumed, it's kind of an elementary component. So I would not use that example or that strength as something that you guide the recommenders to write about. Remember that any one of the principal strengths that you are choosing to speak about, or the recommender is choosing to speak about must be spoken in relation to an example, right? So they do need to have a specific example that illustrates you in action. How are you in that scenario where you illustrate this principal strength that they want the admission committee to hear or to see in their letter recommendation? Obviously, there is an element of all of these is success, outcome, right? So your principal strengths is not just about this is your strength, but how is your strength supportive of the community, of the project, of the job, of your colleagues, whatever it is that is being compared or whatever example is being shared. That is an element that you do need, or they need to write in their letter recommendation. And then, of course, the leadership potential. Are you someone who can potentially lead other people? Are the recommenders able to see that and be able to speak to that in their letters of recommendation, right? So these are very important elements that must be included in the letter recommendation. And if you need support in that process, I do encourage you to reach out and let's discuss how I can support you in this process in guiding the recommenders, as well as obviously guiding your applications themselves. So let's go to the second main question. And this is the feedback question itself, right? So you're going to choose the most relevant feedback to talk about. One thing I would say is another thing you shouldn't do is choose a feedback that you received a week ago, right? The reason is if you are to use feedback as an opportunity to showcase, what did you learn, but also how did you grow from that experience? Something that happened a week ago is not enough time for the recommender to actually speak about the lesson that you learned in that experience, right? So you want to choose a feedback example experience that there has been some time that has passed where the recommender can really expand on that feedback and speak to how have you grown as a professional. You are going to here also, you want the recommender to not just speak in macro level terms, but in actual details of the circumstances, because that's part of the question. What are the circumstances that led to the feedback? What was your response to the feedback? And then, of course, the added element of how did you learn from that experience? How did you grow from that feedback that you were given initially or you were given by the recommenders? So those are elements that your feedback question must include. This is not about including, by the way, another thing you should not do is have several feedback. The question is asking for the most important feedback, which means one example, right? So, if you're listing a lot of different feedback, it's not going to make you look very good, right? So choose one example as that. I see that there's another comment. Okay, so Instagram question has come in. What are some examples of negative feedback, and what are admission officers looking for in response? Is it how you respond or how you grew? Does the feedback itself matter? Is there such a thing as feedback that should not be included in the response? Feedback that makes someone read the example experience and questions your character, it's probably not a feedback that you would want to be including in there. Your response does matter, right? So if you're right feedback and you're having a temper tantrum, it's not going to be the kinds of feedback or the kind of response that the admission team is looking for. They are looking for growth mindset, right? Those are the kinds of people that they're looking for in letters of recommendation. So how have you illustrated growth mindset? Typically, growth mindset is someone who is going to be able to look at a problem, learn from that problem, and look for ways to solve it, not just in that immediate circumstance, but also take that lesson, take that feedback, take that sort of a element where there was some setback, and apply it in the future as well. So it's not a one-time thing either. So those are some of the components that you want to make sure that you're mindful of when you choose which example to include. Negative feedback can be something like your, you didn't sign a contract, right? Well, nowadays everyone operates with contracts. When there's an agreement in any kind of partnership, and that could have led to some sort of negative experience, negative outcome, and you would have received feedback from your recommender, from your supervisor, that speaks to that specific feedback. So that is one example. Obviously, there's many different ways that you could have received feedback, and I'm happy to go through in those details, kind of more on a one-on-one basis. So with that, some of the stories, so you still want to make sure that you're guiding your recommenders to remember the stories, right? Remember the experiences that they have been a part of, especially if the recommender has been supervising you for some time now. They may forget some of the elements of your contributions and your experiences. So you want to take this time to reflect on those experiences, reflect on those on that journey that you've had with that supervisor. And it has to be the journey you've had with the supervisor, not the journey you've had with the company. So very important distinction here. The company, your time that you worked at a given company, especially if you had multiple supervisors, is not relevant in relation to the letter recommendation. The recommender needs to be able to speak to your contributions since they have supervised you, right? That's the framework that you are basing your letters of recommendation on. Obviously, you want to choose examples that showcase your leadership, that showcase your transferable skills, and obviously that speaks to a character that is in alignment with what you are writing the rest of your application on. I like to think of one's application as, a puzzle piece. If we've made a photo of you, a headshot of you, into a puzzle and mixed them all together, now each component of the application is a puzzle piece that, if put together correctly, they will present the picture that is you. The recommenders are doing also the same thing. They're contributing to that mosaic of, or those puzzle pieces of what makes you such a strong character or such a strong candidate for an MBA program. You're going to use real life examples, so nothing that's theoretical, nothing that is assumed. One of the things that I will say is you do not want to let the admission committee assume anything. You want to be as clear as possible, because you do not know what they're going to assume, right? You want to make sure that your intention of what you want to say is captured in your letters of recommendation, in your material as well. So any assumption is actually a red flag or a potential red flag, because that also comes down to communication and communication style, right? Obviously, in the letters of recommendation, you also want to demonstrate growth. That feedback question is really looking for how did you grow, and they're wanting to look at a question from the perspective, or look at an example from the perspective of a time when you didn't have such smooth sailing and didn't have a chance to really demonstrate your greatest strength. Maybe this was a weakness that you had to deal with. How did you grow from that weakness and from that experience? And I know we're running out of time. So if there are any final questions that you guys want to ask, please, this is the right time to actually ask a question in the comments. And I'm going to stop sharing screens so that I can answer some questions that came in through the registration form. So we'll put those, because those are anonymous on the screen. We'll put those on the screen. So what should I do if my direct supervisor is not supportive of my MBA plans? That is an excellent question. If your supervisor is not supportive of your MBA plans, you have to choose someone else. And you have to choose someone else who is supportive of you, who is willing to write strong letters of recommendation, is enthusiastic of you as a candidate. So you really want to make sure that the person who is writing the letter recommendation is really supportive. If they're not, if you have any doubts about them, then you need to really look at someone else to choose as recommender. Excellent. So I invite you to register for our next week's event. We're going to talk about the MBA application timeline. This is round 1 full swing and application season. So register for that event to talk about where I will cover the timelines and what you should be doing at what point. I know the essay questions are not out yet, but when those essay questions come through, there is going to be a lot more chaos. So there's a lot of things that you can do before those essay questions come out that will, have the right foundation built, and then obviously from there you build the stories that you are sharing for the schools, for the target schools that you are applying to. So with that, thank you for being so engaged, for joining us on this live. Don't forget to subscribe, to like this video if it was really helpful for you, and share it with other people that are in your community who are going through this process as well and can find this beneficial too. Thank you, and I will see you next week.